Welcome to Zarnia for Games and Geekery. I'm Adhil.
And I'm Rob.
Rob, hey!
That's me.
We've got a special guest in the studio today. John wasn't able to make it, but Rob, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
I'm Rob Van Zyl. I'm a publisher. I have a company called Pleasant Company Games, South African Boardgame publishing company. And I'm an artist, graphic designer, and developer.
And we did one of Rob's games recently. It was Ancient Terrible Things.
Oh,
so check out our review on that. And today, Rob is going to be talking to us about one of his favorite dudes on a map games.
Kemet.
What is Kemet? What does that mean?
That is a good question.
This is where we need John.
I think Kemet was possibly one of the gods, or one of the pharaohs, possibly.
We don't know the Kemet thing.
No, what is that? There was a bit of a sidewinder. I was like, Kemet? I'm sure it's the area where the
Egyptians called their country Kemet, literally the Black Land. It was the cultivated area along the Nile Valley, black fertile soil.
Now at least I know the answer to that when you ask me.
Who are we playing as in Kemet?
Well, Adhil, I think we play as a divinity, which is an ancient Egyptian god. They're all sort of styled in different classic archetypes. We've sort of got a sort of cat sphinx kind of god. Mm-hmm. There's a bird god that you're playing. And we're basically vying for control of Kemet, which is ancient Egypt. And we've each got a player board that represents our divinity, which we'll use to activate various actions and bring our troops onto the board.
In this game, we are fighting for some control of certain regions, and not just the regions, but actually temples. And we start off with some pyramids, which allow us to do various different actions.
I think, Adhil, this game is it's a very tight area control game. So it is a dudes on a map game where basically you have control of certain areas and you get rewarded for those areas. I think what makes this game particularly good within this genre is that it's a very constricted game space. You're almost forced into battle situations where you're forced to confront your opponents, and the game actually rewards those sort of interactions and rewards those sort of battles, where often in other kind of area control games people often try to avoid direct confrontation, or they might try and have a strategy where they don't get involved, and this game is quite the opposite. It rewards that.
Yeah, it is quite different to a lot of those other dudes on a map games like Blood Rage, for example, which is much more of a Euro game at heart, I think. In a number of these sorts of games, you can do a bit of turtling, but I think if you're trying to avoid conflict in this game, you're just going to come out last, right? I think the main way, to your point, that they incentivize attacking is by giving you these permanent victory points for winning battles. To win the game, you need to have at least a certain number of victory points. Some of them are going to be permanent points that you get for doing certain actions or winning in a battle. And then the others that you get are temporary victory points that you will get for controlling a particular temple or for upgrading your pyramids to the top level. If someone's got a lot of points and some of those are the temporary points, you can go after them and take those away from them. So if someone takes over the temple from you, they get that point and you lose the point. So there's quite a big swing there.
It's one of the few games I've seen that's got these sort of temporary victory points, which they pass back and forwards between players. I think it does make it much more contested.
How does a turn work? In your turn, you have a choice of various different actions. Move some of your units that are already on the board to certain other spaces. So you can usually move a couple of spaces, and they have this very interesting mechanism whereby you can teleport to one of the obelisks. So you can go from one of your temples straight into an obelisk, which means that you can get to, even though, as you were saying earlier, the board is kind of constricted, you can go to almost anywhere you want to on the board, which is also what encourages kind of conflict as well. So there's movement, there's also recruitment, so you can gain new units onto the board into your city. You can also build up your pyramids. You start with 3 different pyramids. Each of the pyramids has a specific color, and those relate to these power tiles that we'll talk about in a second. The red ones are more to do with attacking, the blue ones are more defensive, the black has a kind of combination of those. Depending on which of those particular strategies you're trying to lean into, you might build up a certain pyramid. Then there's the praying action, which gives you these prayer points. And the prayer points are kind of the currency in the game, and you're going to spend those on the various actions that you're doing, and specifically on buying these power tiles. Now, the power tiles are really how you build up your factions or your kind of people to be very different to everyone else at the table. Each one of them has a certain level that you're going to get, depending on the level that your pyramids have gotten to. And some of them will even give you some of these really cool creature minis that will contribute to your troops' power. Now, this version that we are playing is Kemet, Blood and Sand, which is kind of the second edition, right? And I know
Correct.
You fell in love with the game in the first edition. What drew you to the game?
Well, I think the first edition, which is probably close to 10 years old, somewhere to that sort of time length, it had quite a particular art style. It was certainly very eye-catching. It had this very underground sort of art direction to it, and certainly the original board was very eye-popping. It was one of the original Dudes on a Map games from this company. A company's called Matagot. They're a French publisher, and it forms part of a trilogy of area control games that they've done. I think this was the first one. Then they had Cyclades, which was a sequel to this game. And then the third game in that trilogy was a game called Inish, which was, they sort of went to a sort of Celtic space. And those three formed their trilogy of what they're known as the Dudes on a Map games from Matagot. The original game is about 10 years old, and they recently, probably a year, 18 months ago, they did a Kickstarter for this new version where they've solved a lot of the mechanical aspects that were problematic in the first version of the game, and they've also introduced sort of quality of life improvements to the game by bringing in these sort of tile trays, and they've made everything a little bit bigger and bolder, like any good solid Kickstarter production. Yeah,
I really like the trays. I think it makes it a lot easier to set up and a lot easier to just get the game started. Sure. But I also like the pyramid upgrades, right? So these pyramids are all, each level that you go up, you add on, and so you can see visually how you're building up your pyramid, and it feels a bit more thematic. Whereas the old game had those dice that they were using, and you would just turn the four-sided die to the level, which also stood out. Like, it was one of the only games that I remember from that time that was doing that. So it was definitely distinctive, but I feel like this makes it a bit more thematic.
Well, you've certainly always had a love of four-sided dice, and I know for all the years that I've known you, you've always tried to design games with four-sided dice.
True.
So this was certainly one of the most the original game that used four-sided dice in a very unique way.
Yeah. Where
the dice weren't rolled, they were simply used to represent a height. And you mentioned very correctly, I think what they've done in this new version is that they identified that pyramid, those four-sided dice, as one of the most interesting aspects of that game. And they've lent into that aspect by going sort of with a multi-level plastic construction, and certainly is one of the key, most interesting things from a miniatures perspective in this new version. That is a solid upgrade, and I think they've really done something very clever here.
And they've made the new minis a little bit bigger, so you can see the difference in size. Largely, they look pretty similar to what they had before, so they were always good. And I think that in some of them, they've done some good upgrades. But I know one of the things that has changed in the editions is the artwork of the board, for example, and some of the player boards. How do you feel about those?
Mixed feelings with this aspect, and I know this is my personal taste. And anyone who's familiar with the games that I produce and make will know that my style is particularly underground art, and I think the original game had much more of an underground art style, which was attracted me to that.
Sure.
I can understand with the new edition that sort of art style would be quite divisive, and maybe that's the reason why they've gone with something that's a lot more, I don't want to say more commercial, but maybe that's a little bit less indie, I suppose is a good word for it. Pleasant Company Games is actually working quite closely with Matagot, who are the publishers of this game, and I recently spoke to the publisher directly when I saw him at Essen, which is a big game show in Germany, and we discussed Kemet. And I said to him how I was a big fan of the original and wasn't crazy about the new version from the board perspective, and I could understand his reasoning. And he said it was to find something that was a bit more mainstream, for want of a better word. Outside of the board, the rest of the game is very much what was in the original game. The artwork on the tiles, the artwork on the cards has been taken from the original game. They've made the tiles bigger, the cards are bigger. Player mats are now obviously double layered, which is a trend that we're seeing often in board games now. It's a wonderful upgrade to what was there before.
And what do you think's the best player count? I mean, I kind of feel 3 players at least is needed, and maybe 4. But I know you're sort of averse to playing at 5 or 6 players. Like, do you think that this game could work at 5, or do you think the sweet spot is lower?
I'm not a big fan of 5, 6 player games, but this is the sort of game that I would give a sort of an exception to, because the board is such a constrained space. The more players that are on this board, the more chaotic and the more fun it is. This game leans into not enough room for everyone on the board, that you literally have to start like elbowing people out the way. The turn structure is built in such a way that's so fast that there's never huge downtime. Turns are very quick, battles are very quick, and even if you're not directly involved in a battle, it's quite engaging to sort of be on the sidelines, because like any good area control game where a battle is happening between 2 opposing players, the other players are all keeping an eye on, like vultures, on picking the carcass of the area that's left. So the game remains compelling at any player count. And in fact, it's the sort of game I probably wouldn't recommend at 2 players. I think it definitely needs 3, 4, or higher.
I really thought it was quite exciting. First of all, to work out when to play, because you do have to work out when you would like to play in turn order, and sometimes it's better to play later on than to play early on.
Absolutely.
You kind of want to wait and see what everyone else is doing and make the last move into a temple or to attack right at the end when nobody can attack you back. I thought that it was quite interesting, the decisions you needed to make, right? Because like in my first few plays of the game, I kept trying to work out and like overanalyze how to optimize what I was doing. But actually, I think this game, you really just need to go out there and attack, right? And attack as much as you can.
I mean, you made a very good point there. There's a sort of game where being later in turn order is actually to your advantage. And in fact, I think the contestation is actually to try and certainly in the last turn of the game is to have the last move of the last turn of the game.
Yeah, because it can get quite tense there when you're all at around about the same amount of points, but just about tipping the end of the game. But whoever goes last has that last opportunity to get slightly ahead.
Absolutely. What kind of weight of game this is? Is it a complicated game? Is it a game for my family? Is it a game for my friends? Often the comparison here is if you know the game of Risk, which is probably the original area control game that we've all got in our family cupboard. This would be a classic upgrade to saying, okay, this is Risk with all the bells and whistles that you would get in a modern German European style game. It would be called Risk Plus, set in ancient Egypt. Would be a good sort of.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good comparison. So we've talked about a lot of different aspects of the game. There's really is quite a lot going on, even though it's relatively simple at its heart. What's your favorite bit?
But what makes the game really shine is the fact that you have these power tiles, which you are essentially buying during the course of the game, and they will dictate your strategy, and they give you certain specific effects that you can play through the game. And it's a very compelling marketplace, for want of a better word, where you're trying to kind of combo up a different number of sort of effects and try and use sort of 5 or 6 of these tiles that you'll build through the game to try and have a winning strategy. And I think that really makes the game shine.
Agreed. And
it gives the game a feeling of progression and builds up to sort of a ratchet where you've got this power at the end of the game. And it's not in a long time frame. So I think that really makes the game shine.
Totally. I think that's mine as well. It's the engine that you're able to build. And as you say, you can combo certain things together. You start off almost exactly the same in terms of power levels and all of that. But very quickly, you build up asymmetry. That for me, that idea of building up your tableau and your powers is really attractive to me.
Very interestingly, meeting the publishers Matago in Essen at the Spiel show, which is the big tabletop game show that happens every year in Germany, and talking to the CEO of Matago, and this game particularly is one that's very close to his heart, and I think it shows in the fact that he's decided to do a second edition. And I think what you can see within this new production is that they have taken the best parts of the original Kemet. They've kept a lot of the great art direction, and they've just expanded this into a very lavish production.
And I think importantly for them is also reaching a new crowd or a new set of people
Absolutely.
that maybe were not around when the first edition came out. So that was Kemet. If you enjoyed the game, please tell us in the comments below. Remember to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. This has been Zarnia for Games and Geekery. Thanks very much, Rob, for joining us today.
Wonderful.
And we'll see you again next time.
See you soon.